The text arrived at 10:42 p.m. No greeting, no explanation, just one cold sentence. You weren't invited to Christmas dinner. Your brother's girlfriend doesn't feel comfortable around you. Danielle Harper stared at the message for a long time. Her thumb hovered over the screen while something inside her slowly cracked open. Not because she was surprised, because deep down, she had spent years preparing for a moment exactly like this. A moment where the truth finally became impossible to ignore. For nearly a decade, Danielle had quietly carried her family through crisis after crisis. When her parents' business struggled, she stepped in financially. When invoices piled up, she covered them. When suppliers threatened to walk away, she made calls behind the scenes to keep everything afloat. Over time, her support added up to more than $120,000. No contracts, no ownership agreements, just trust. Because she believed family meant showing up for each other. And now, after all of it, she was being excluded from Christmas dinner to avoid making someone uncomfortable. Danielle typed one word back. Okay. Then she placed her phone face down on the kitchen counter and quietly disappeared from their lives. Not dramatically, not cruelly, just completely. That night, she opened a folder on her laptop labeled Family Expenses. Inside were years of receipts, account records, emergency transfers, utility payments, vendor invoices, and silent rescues nobody had ever thanked her for. She looked at them carefully. Then, one by one, she started disconnecting herself from every financial tie. Automatic payments canceled, shared expenses removed, outstanding balances redirected, vendor support withdrawn, not out of revenge, out of clarity. Because for the first time in her life, Danielle understood something painful. Her family didn't value her presence. They valued her usefulness. And there's a difference. By morning, chaos had already started. Her phone filled with missed calls. Her father left angry voicemails demanding explanations. Her mother used her softest tone. Sweetheart, there's been a misunderstanding. But Danielle noticed something important. Nobody called to apologize for excluding her. They called because the bills stopped getting paid. Her brother texted next. You're seriously doing this over a dinner invitation? Danielle stared at the message quietly. No, it wasn't about one dinner. It was about years of being welcomed only when she was needed. Years of being the reliable daughter nobody defended emotionally, but everyone depended on financially. That morning, she made coffee, sat by the window, and watched snow fall across the city in complete silence. And for the first time in years, she felt peaceful. Not because her family was struggling, because she had finally stopped abandoning herself to keep everyone else comfortable. Over the next several days, the cracks inside the family business spread quickly. Suppliers began calling, accounts froze, bills piled up, the store reduced operating hours. And slowly, everyone realized something they had ignored for years. Danielle had quietly been holding everything together. Her mother eventually called crying. If the business collapses, we lose everything. Danielle closed her eyes. Because somehow, even now, the conversation wasn't about hurting her. It was about consequences finally arriving. For years, Danielle had mistaken endurance for love. She thought loyalty meant continuing to give even when the relationship exhausted her emotionally. But healing taught her something different. Real love does not require self-erasure. That afternoon, Danielle officially withdrew all remaining informal investments tied to the family business. The email she sent was short and professional. No insults, no emotional speeches, just finality. And strangely enough, that calmness frightened her family more than anger ever could. Because anger still negotiates. Silence does not. A few days later, Danielle walked through her old neighborhood alone. She passed the family store she once helped save countless times. The windows looked dimmer now. A reduced hours sign hung crookedly near the entrance. People used to stop Danielle on those streets and tell her she was such a good daughter. And she was. But eventually she realized something important. Being a good daughter should never require becoming someone's emotional emergency fund. That night, she printed a photograph of the storefront and pinned it beside her desk. Underneath it, she wrote one sentence: "Never shrink yourself to keep others comfortable." It became a reminder, not of resentment, of survival. The only family member Danielle kept close was her 10-year-old niece, Ava. Ava was different, gentle, observant, the kind of child who noticed when someone felt invisible. One evening, while baking cookies together, Ava asked quietly, "Do you miss them?" Danielle paused before answering. "I miss who I hoped they could become," she admitted. That was the hardest part. Not losing the family she had. Losing the dream of the family she kept trying to earn. Weeks turned into months, and slowly, Danielle's life began changing in unexpected ways. Without constant financial emergencies draining her energy, she finally focused on herself. She restarted her consulting business, traveled more, read books she never had time for before, started sleeping peacefully again. The guilt faded slowly. Then one day, something surprising happened. Joy returned. Not loud joy, quiet joy. The kind that arrives when your nervous system finally realizes it no longer has to stay in survival mode. Meanwhile, her family's world continued unraveling. The business faced lawsuits over unpaid accounts. Tax problems surfaced. Several longtime vendors cut ties completely. Danielle heard about it through mutual acquaintances, but she stayed silent. Not because she lacked compassion, because she finally understood that rescuing people from every consequence only teaches them they never need to change. One spring morning, a handwritten letter arrived from her mother. Inside were pages filled with sadness, guilt, and requests for reconciliation. But Danielle noticed something immediately. The letter focused heavily on how much the family was suffering. Very little was said about the pain they caused her. That realization hurt more than the exclusion itself, because even now, they still centered their own discomfort. At the bottom of the letter, her father had added one short sentence in his familiar blunt handwriting: "You're still part of this family, whether you like it or not." Danielle stared at those words for a long moment. Then she stepped onto her balcony, lit the letter carefully in a small metal tray, and watched it burn into ash. Not dramatically, not angrily, peacefully. And as smoke curled into the spring air, she whispered quietly, "I'm not your safety net anymore." For the first time in her life, the sentence felt sacred. Over the following months, Danielle removed every remaining connection tying her financially and emotionally to the family. Accounts closed, legal documents updated, emergency contacts changed, old obligations released. Each step felt less like revenge and more like reclaiming herself. One evening, Ava asked her gently, "Are boundaries the same thing as giving up on people?" Danielle smiled softly. "No," she said. "Boundaries are how we stop giving up on ourselves." Ava nodded thoughtfully, holding that answer carefully the way children do when they know something matters. A year passed. And somewhere during that year, Danielle stopped measuring her life through the lens of rejection. The grief softened. The silence became normal. The anger disappeared. Not because the past stopped hurting, because healing finally became louder than the pain. Then one morning, Danielle sat inside a courthouse holding paperwork in her hands. The clerk glanced up politely. "Name change?" she asked. Danielle smiled faintly. "Yes." But privately, she knew it was something deeper than that. She wasn't just changing her name. She was changing the story she carried about herself. For years, she believed love had to be earned through sacrifice. Now she understood something life-changing. The right people do not require you to destroy yourself to remain worthy of belonging. When she walked out of that courthouse later that afternoon, the air felt lighter somehow. Not because everything was perfect, because she finally belonged to herself. That evening, Ava greeted her at home holding handmade paper flowers. "Happy New Beginning Day," she said proudly. Danielle laughed softly through sudden tears. And later that night, after cookies and old movies and quiet conversation, she opened a blank journal. On the very first page, she wrote, "This is where my real life begins." Because in the end, this story was never really about Christmas dinner, or money, or a collapsing business. It was about a woman finally realizing her worth should never depend on how useful she is to people unwilling to love her fully. And honestly, that realization changed everything. Danielle didn't destroy her family. She simply stopped carrying them. And once she did, she finally learned how to carry herself with peace instead.